circumstance that might quickly shaken our faith if we're not on guard? Well, it has to do with the apostates.
Something like, can you believe what I heard about this matter, or this person, or that person, referring to a statement that may have appeared on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter? The spread of rumors is like wildfire that is hard to control. It spreads distrust and can undermine someone's faith.
How you doing, guys? In 2009, 2008, somewhere in there, and I had received an eye injury that required surgery to correct. The unfortunate part of that, I was under a patch for a while. Now, at the time, I worked early morning hours, so I'd have to drive to work. And being under a patch, you had to be extremely careful because obviously you're vision impaired. Your field of view isn't that great. Wasn't too long, I had developed what I like to call phantom sight. I wasn't thinking about it, but while I was driving to work one morning, I could have sworn I could have seen the side of the road. And it just dawned on me, you're under a patch, you cannot see the side of the road. And I'm thinking, it's a good thing nobody was walking. I would have plowed right into them and not even known it. After that, I got very paranoid. So I was extremely careful while driving, and I really couldn't avoid it at that time. And that got me thinking about something that I had heard when I first made contact with Jehovah's Witnesses. The first thing they stuck in your head was you have to go through life with blinders on. Now, when the first time they told me that, the first thing that crossed my mind, you're not going to cross a busy street with blinders on. Granted, it was figurative, but it doesn't matter. Blinders are blinders, whether it be figurative or the real thing. Not a very safe thing to do. As the years went by, I started noticing this. Now, to be a successful Jehovah's Witness, you literally have to go through life with blinders on. Your senses are dulled down, and I noticed this when, they could spot perceived enemies, those enemies and dangers that the governing body would place in their field of view. And yet they would not see the real dangers in their life. I'd see more witnesses walk head on into dangerous situations and not even be aware of it. This, to me, never quite worked. I mean, I always kept my wits about me, and I never really was fully indoctrinated. And I would point things out over the years to witnesses, and they still would not see them. But, like I said, to be a successful JW, you pretty much have to be dumbed down. You have to be literally blind to the entire world, and this is what Watchtower does. And I started realizing as the years went by that their whole belief system, everything that they hold, their faith, is built on a house of cards. It doesn't take much to topple it. Now, I've seen a lot of JWs who thought their faith was strong, but anybody in that organization who had good faith, you pull the blinders off, and it's going to start wearing away on their faith and their entire belief system. And I started noticing too many Watchtower articles, too many JW talks that were given were about eroding faith. And what they would do is they would put this perceived enemy for the JWs to look out for. Not real dangers, but perceived dangers, like the mentally diseased apostates. See, to keep the JWs away from former members, apostate apparently wasn't bad enough. They had to convince Jehovah's Witnesses that everybody who left the organization was mentally diseased. I mean, it's amazing. When you say the word apostate to a JW, they're in total fear of these people. And these are people that at one time they did know. Now, in recent years, they've thrown the media into the mix as well. They've demonized former members. They've demonized the media. Anybody who goes up against Watchtower, they will demonize and keep Jehovah's Witnesses in total fear. Now, living in fear, with blinders on, looking at perceived dangers, is no way to go through life. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that the entire system is rigged to keep people in fear. And Watchtower's been doing this for over a century now, keeping their members in total fear. And the thing is, now it seems to be a worldwide thing. Now, granted, things are getting pretty hairy out there, but still, is that any reason to live in fear? No, because the thing is, when you live in fear, you can't think straight. Your brain doesn't work. You're totally focused on this perceived danger that may or may not be real, and yet you're not able to see anything about you. The other thing that Watchtower like to do, and Jehovah's Witnesses like to do, is they like to micromanage people's lives. They keep them in fear, and they micromanage every little thing about them. And when I started noticing this, I started thinking, now, did the Almighty micromanage his creations? I mean, if you think about it, no, he didn't. Because if the Almighty micromanaged his creations, Eve would never have been able to take that fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Or for that matter, Satan wouldn't have been able to tempt her to begin with. So if the Almighty didn't micromanage his creations or keep them in fear, who is Watchtower to do so? And JWs really think it's for their own good, but really, does it do anybody any good to dull down their senses, to keep them in a childlike state to where they can't even stop and smell the roses? I mean, over the years, I noticed that. Every conversation with every JW was virtually the same. It was like talking to a Watchtower article. It was always the same thing. They'd comment on the last meeting. Wasn't that a great speaker? Or the Watchtower article. Or the convention or the assemblies. It was virtually the same. And it's because they were all living in tunnel vision. And I got to a point where things were starting to rattle me a bit. And I took a step back. And I'm like, wow, I had set myself up for failure because there was no way I could allow an organization to put this perceived danger that was not there before, and yet totally ignore the real thing. But to keep them in fear, much like 2020, keeps people under control. I started noticing this. More and more talks were about eroding faith, because Watchtower were well aware of this, that their belief system were built in a house of cards. Now, for anybody who's ever built a house of cards, what happens if you take a bottom deck card and pull it out? That entire house of cards is going to topple and crumble. Much like Jehovah's Witnesses' belief system, their faith is built on a house of cards. Watchtower knows this. This is why they have to keep them under control and spoon feed them little bits of information, which never changes. I started realizing that every Watchtower article, every study, every meeting was about the same thing, and it came down to obedience to a group of men in Warwick, New York. More and more talks about eroding faith, and that started waking me up. Thing was, they did try to reel me back in when they realized that I was kind of backing away, but the unfortunate thing, once that house of cards comes down and you start to see it for what it is, there's really no way you can go back to being dumbed down. And you can't tell me there's a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses in there that this hasn't happened to and that are just going through the motions. There's just no way you can start to unsee things. It was about 2011, because once I started fading, that was it. I mean, once I started seeing it for what it was, there just was no way I could buy the BS. You fool me once, that's one thing, but it's not going to happen again. And that would be my fault if I let it happen again, or anybody for that matter. One elder thought it'd be a good idea to give me a study, try and reel me back in. At the time, I didn't know everything that was going on with the organization, so I had agreed to it. This study did not have the same effect as the first one, because now I had in the back of my mind that everything I had learned was one big lie. It was false. So, without warning, I just stopped going to the study. And it was just months before I finally was officially out. Another elder thought the same thing, have another study. I agreed to this, but not for the same reason, but I agreed to this to feel him out, to see what he knew. Kind of find out he knew a lot more than he had admitted, and I felt him out for several weeks and found out that, yes, he did know everything I knew, but he was still complying with the organization. He was still backing up the governing body and what they were saying about eroding faith. But they were putting this out there. They were demonizing everybody on the outside. And little do they know that when they were giving me the study, I already knew. Now, at this point in time, I had already been mocked. So the shunning thing was already in effect long before I had left. And being DF'd shortly thereafter, the shunning thing had no effect. I had been shunned for 6 years, so I was well aware of that. And I started thinking about that. The rare occasion I would go to the Kingdom Hall, and I'd look at all these people turning their backs on me. And at one time, when I first came here, they were love bombing me to lure me in. But this is the kind of control they have over these people. Their emotions are like a light switch. They'll love bomb you one time, shun you the next. And this has happened to many. And once you see the truth about the organization, there's no way you can unsee it. And that's why so many people are leaving. And even if you do go back, that doubt is always going to be in the back of your mind. You know how fragile this organization is. The overabundance of damage control is unbelievable that they're doing. But what they're trying to do is lock in what they've got left. So they will demonize the former members, which they've been doing forever. They're now demonizing the media. It must be Satan's media, unless, of course, it's positive on their part. And they'll demonize anybody who says anything about Watchtower. See, Jehovah's Witnesses, the indoctrinated ones, that word, the mentally diseased apostates, sends shivers up their spine. Anyways, guys, that's all I wanted to bring to your attention. Feel free to leave your comments below, and I will talk to you soon.